Now, specifically, we're going to be looking at history going backwards from here back way into the Bible. What the Driftless area has to do with the Ice Age. Does anyone know what the Ice Age was?
Mammoth.
Mammoths. What else do we have, Sam?
When stuff got really cold.
It got really cold. What else did we have? Something really interesting. It was not really cold during the Ice Age. It wasn't. It was actually, you're from Wisconsin, right? What temperature is it when you get the really big snowstorms?
Cold.
10, 25 degrees, you know. It's actually kind of warm for winter, right? But you only get those really big snowstorms when it's warmer. What makes a glacier? Now, glacier, the thing that was the Ice Age, was the entire top of the world was covered with a layer of ice a half a mile thick. Like the whole thing. And it just started at the high point and it headed downhill, which in our case was towards us, down through Wisconsin. And when, but what's the word drift? Well, in Wisconsin, we have the top of the state that got scraped off. All rocks, you know, ground away rock and picked things up and carried it along. And then, eventually, do we still have one of those big glaciers out here in Wisconsin?
No.
What did it do?
It melted.
It melted. And if you have a half a mile thick of ice, how much water is that?
100 layers.
It's lots of water. It's lots of water. And so when it melted, it was carrying along rocks, and then it, boom, dropped it. And that's where you get moraines from. And that's like just chunks of gravel and rock and all just dumped. And that's when you go to Kettle Moraine State Park over in near Milwaukee, that's what you'll find. You take the trails, and it's like walking through a gravel pit. You know, it's all the hills like that are just piles of gravel. But sometimes it gets ground up so finely that it becomes dust. And that dust makes the best soil in the world. And all that dust got blown to Kansas. Okay? Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, the Dakotas, Illinois, the best soil in the world. But we have this little area called the Driftless. We were not scraped off and we were not dumped on. And when I was in college, I took geology, and they had a map of where the glaciers were, and there was the Driftless, but they didn't say a word about it. Wonder why they didn't say a word. Well, here's something interesting. Do you know how many theories there are for what made the Ice Age? There are 60 theories for what made the Ice Age that the secular scientists come up with, and not one of them is based in actual observed science. Well, here's the interesting thing. The closest thing they've been able to come up with is called the astronomical theory. The astronomical theory, so you've got, anyone like to hold hands and spin around? And you're going, ah, right? And that's fun. You see how long you can hold on before you let go and go flying, right? That's called centrifugal force, that thing that pulls you apart. But gravitational force is the sun going, I'm bigger than you are, come here. And what you have is the tossing back and forth between the power of gravity and the power of centrifugal force. So sometimes the Earth is going around the sun, and sometimes centrifugal force is kind of winning and it goes farther away. Now, we haven't seen it, but the math is there, okay? So their theory is that when the Earth goes farther away from the sun, that's when you get an ice age. But according to how old they think the Earth is, there have been 4 ice ages, okay? 100,000 years apart, or then you get an ice age. But if the Earth is far away from the sun, do you get a lot of snow?
I do. I ate snow.
You don't get a lot of snow. You get a cold planet. You just get cold planet. It doesn't snow more. So why did my geology book not talk about the Driftless area? Because theoretically, if we've had 4 ice ages, what are the chances that our little spot in the world got missed 4 times? Not very high at all. So here we are in the Driftless area. So we are actually evidence that there was only one ice age. So what caused this ice age? Well, we're going to hear more about that as we go down into the valley. So let's go. Okay, what you are looking at here are rocks from the Sauk megasequence. What's a megasequence? Well, a megasequence is a layer of rock that covers hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, and it can be hundreds of feet thick. And this Sauk megasequence was first identified at Devil's Lake State Park, because you can see it, right? It's also the same rock that you're going to find at the Wisconsin Dells and at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. That's how far this megasequence came. So you can see that there are layers. These are sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks are formed by stuff floating in the water. Okay? And then when the water drains away, some of the stuff gets left behind, and it gets compacted down by the weight of it. And also because the water melts, it dissolves some of the minerals and makes it turn like concrete. But the reason we know, this layer is the first layer that came over when the flood started. And how do we know that? Well, this is the Sauk megasequence, and in the Grand Canyon, it's the bottom layer, except for the basement rocks. And the basement rocks are igneous. Can someone tell me what igneous rocks are? The igneous rock at the bottom of the Grand Canyon was the continent that rose out of the waters on day
4.
Close, three of creation. Then when the time came for the flood the Bible tells us that the fountains of the great deep broke open. And when that happened, if you look at a picture of the map of the seafloor, you will see the Atlantic Ocean has a zipper that goes from top to bottom. And that's where the single continent got split apart. And as it split apart, lava came out and mountains were made underwater.
Well, if the lava floats, we can't touch the lava.
Yeah, lava does not float. Lava is rock, so it goes to the bottom. But at any rate, it split apart. And what happens when you have an earthquake underwater? Does anyone know?
Tsunami.
Tsunami, exactly. And what's a tsunami?
A big wave.
Big wave comes over the land, and with it, it brought all the rock and the sand. This is sandstone, and this was brought from the bottom of the seafloor, and there was so much water that it came from the Pacific Ocean all the way here, because it goes beyond the Sauk County. But it gets thinner and thinner and thinner because what happens? It loses energy as it crosses the land, and it starts to drop stuff, and then there's just not much left to drop, and then it goes back. And then it brings in another wave of more different kinds of minerals. Yes, you can see where the water was. Now, when I love to watch nature shows like Planet Earth, and they all say life started on Earth in a warm, calm sea. Does this look calm? Look at these rocks. They have been shoved around, and then other sand stuck in the middle of them. And I mean, it's amazing what the force of the water to move all this sand around, massive quantities of sand. And anyone ever been buried in sand?
I was buried in
And it's heavy, isn't it? Well, imagine all of that, and water is moving it all around. Now, the fact that we started with volcanoes, this is an important thing to know. Volcanoes started the flood. But what comes out of a volcano? Lava, but believe it or not too many volcanoes have lava. Most of them, 70% of what comes out of a volcano is steam.
and Meg.
What's steam?
Lava. lava. Hey, there's an
Water. Steam is water. And then in addition, you've got ash, you've got gases and things like that, all that steam is going to connect to and condense, and then it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. So we're going to go to our next site. Now we're going to head over to the river.
But this is the perfect.
So this is a tributary of the Pecatonica River, which means that this river eventually will end up in the Pecatonica, which goes down to the Rock, which goes to the Illinois, which goes to the Mississippi. So for years I've been looking at this and going, when did this river get carved out? Because you will have heard that the Grand Canyon was carved out year by year by year by year by year by the Colorado River. But we have seen this river at flood stage, and it doesn't even get halfway across here. So, all right, we're in the Driftless area, and we did not get scraped off by the glaciers, and we did not get dumped on the glaciers, but they went through the Driftless. How did that happen? Well, you know, two rivers that actually were made by the Ice Age that go through the Driftless area, and that is the Wisconsin and the Mississippi, and also the St. Croix. Well, St. Croix comes down into the Mississippi. So they were, their headwaters are up where the glaciers were, but then they go down into the Driftless area. And you've seen, you go to Spring Green and you can hardly see, because of the trees and everything, you can hardly see the other side of the valley. But that whole thing was carved out by the melting of the glaciers. So I was looking at our little valley here going, what? Was it the Ice Age or was it the flood that carved out our little valley here? And Mr. Rebholz, the manager of the property, said that the beginning of this river is north of Dodgeville. Well, all of that is inside the Driftless, which means that it can't have been carved out by the Ice Age. So what carved it out?
The flood.
The flood carved it out. That's right. So this, what you're looking at here is what's called an underfit river, which means that, okay, we'll grant you that water carved out this valley, but this river did not over time carve out the whole valley. We know that it didn't because we have seen this at flood stage and it doesn't even get halfway across. So, but you find, as I said, you find underfit rivers all over the world, and once again, they're evidence of the flood. Because when the rocks were young and they had not compacted and been cemented into actual rock, they were more like, they were, you know, they were softer. So they were able to get moved out and washed away by the water that was flowing off of them. But it's really cool to me to think that this particular feature, that's the flood. It's not something that, oh, you know, it's over in Mesopotamia or something like that. This is right here. It's right here where we live. And so what we're looking here at Swallow Rock, and when you look at these rocks, you can see that there are layers in the rocks, but they are not pleasant, cool, small, you know, warm. What do they call that? That warm, calm inland sea where life arose. Because look at these rocks. They're like all over the place. There's another, so this is more evidence that all these got laid down at once. And I missed a step. What happened, what geologists will say is that you will see layers, and with these layers, they call them varves, and they're like tree rings. So you have a summer layer and a winter layer, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, like that. And their assumption is that each year in your lake or your inland sea or whatever it is, another layer gets laid down. But those layers are always going to be exactly perpendicular to the pull of the Earth's gravity. All right, that's just what happens, right? You pour water out and it all goes the same way. If these layers were put down year by year by year by year, what would happen? You'd have currents, and they would make erosion that would dig out gullies. You'd have plants growing that would leave roots, and the roots would disturb the layers as they went down through. What about worms and other things and clams and things that live in the mud? They would disturb those layers. But we don't see that. We see layer, 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 very smooth, very even. So this is another piece of evidence that that this was all laid down all at once, and rather catastrophically, because it's not nice and flat, right? It's so we've been talking about how all of these things, these geologic features, were made because of the flood and the ice age. So the question is, why is that important? Well, the Bible says in Psalm 119, 160, that's a lot of verses, that thy word is true from the beginning. Truth didn't just show up with Jesus, the way and the truth and the life, and truth didn't change over time. We didn't get above that thing in the 20th century, and so those things aren't true anymore. Thy word is true from the beginning. And is the Bible a book of science? No, but it is a book about history. And when it tells us things that happened, we have to take that into account. And that should be our first thing, the first thing that we look at. And everything else has to fit into it. And I have a whole list in my Bible of things that scientists thought the Bible was wrong on. And then, oh my goodness, turns out they were right. And now we know the answer. And so whatever you come across, you have to remember, maybe science says something different from what the Bible says, but science just has to catch up.